It feels like you've lost the plot. Why the obsession with Israel and the Jews? When did you become so controversial? You're a mother. I don't get it. What about the kids in Gaza? Just a snippet of some of the things that get sent to me. Not regularly, but enough for me to take notice and want to address. And I guess the motivation here isn't defending myself. I don't need to. I'm immensely proud of what I fight for every single day. But this is for those who are genuinely confused. I'm responding in the hope that it might help some people understand. Not why I've lost the plot, but why I'm fighting for their very existence as well as my own. Why this non-Jewish, Catholic, albeit not particularly religious, girl from down under has become laser focused on this minuscule country in the Middle East and its multi-front fight for survival. Why I vigorously condemn and try to expose an enemy that might seem geographically very far away from me and my people. Why I've turned down multiple job offers, yes, since losing everything last year, because I know they will require my silence in a space where I simply cannot be. It wasn't October 7 that scared me. I mean, like many others, that day broke me. It horrified me. It made me physically ill many times. But I'd seen this kind of evil. Well, close to it anyways. My dad, a former major general and senator, fought ISIS, Al-Qaeda. He was in Iraq for a year as chief of operations for the US Allied Forces, which was an incredible responsibility for an Australian commander. Unheard of almost. I was given a front row seat to the way that terrorists there operated. The sadistic brutality they inflicted not only upon their enemies, but even more so upon their own people. So as I watched the raw vision from October 7, every single second of it from that massacre, I felt prepared in a way for what I was about to see, but nothing could have prepared me for what I did eventually watch. Hamas were, shockingly, even more depraved than I could have ever imagined. And my bar was low. The immense joy they derived out of burning children alive. Yes, I stood in a room where 3 children were burned alive, having watched their parents be killed. Blowing up fathers in front of kids. Deforming women and chopping off heads. They smiled. They laughed. They called their family back home to brag. It was a kind of evil even I didn't think was possible, well, not in a human form anyways. But again, this wasn't the most horrifying part for me. It wasn't those images that impacted me enough to dedicate much of my life to this battle. It was the reaction of the world. The reaction here in my own backyard as Australians celebrated the largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. They cheered and chanted, screamed with joy. It was the pro-Hamas anti-Jew rallies around the world that were organised even as the killings in Israel were still taking place, whilst young women and babies were being dragged away as hostages. The protests against the victim nation before an IDF boot had hit the ground in Gaza. And not 1 or 2 lone rangers, not the predictable nutcase sadistic terrorist lover types we all know well, but masses of people, millions even, who appeared to, and I'll borrow the phrase directed at me by them, appeared to have completely lost the plot. This was what terrified me to the point that I realised the threat here is not just to Israel or the innocent children born in Gaza. It was so much bigger. The ideological disease had spread. The brainwashing of mostly young people, but old people too, was significant and embedded. I watched women who purported to be feminists marching alongside those calling for the destruction of an entire state, whilst denying the rape of innocent girls. Humanitarian organisations defending killers whilst condemning the victims and not even seeking to disguise it. World leaders of democratic Western nations refusing to stand up for what was right and not only be silent cowards, that's one thing, but unthinkably vocal enablers, supporters, They excused, they encouraged, they empowered, they emboldened bloodthirsty killers. Instead of coming together with collective power and might to deal a crushing blow to the evil forces committing unthinkable acts of terror and horror, all, mind you, live streamed for the world to see. You didn't have to take anyone's word for it. Universities became hotbeds of Jew hatred and Hamas love-ins. The future leaders of our world were wearing keffiyehs and chanting from the river to the sea and calling for intifada and death to Jews. Then, of course, they became, well, much more inclusive, burning American flags and screaming death to the West. From the UK to Europe, the US, Australia, I watched people who profess to care about humanity link arms with terrorists whose sole purpose is to destroy it. So have I lost the plot? No, I've found it. When I learnt about the Holocaust at school, like most, I was deeply impacted and shaken. As much by Hitler and the depth of his evil as by how many stood by and did nothing. As a young girl, I found it almost impossible to understand. I couldn't comprehend the concept of bystanders. Even back then, I hoped if there were ever a repeat, I'd be brave enough not to be one. Confident that even if the worst occurred again, I'd be incapable of silence. But equally, in fact, more so convinced that there would be no way in the world that it would ever be allowed to happen again. Yet here we are. If we continue along this current path, then nowhere and no one is safe. This hate, and not the kind we have the privilege of being accustomed to in most of the Western world, you know, the way you might feel about your ex-boyfriend or your mother-in-law. Not that kind of hate. That's a luxury. But instead the level of detest that leads those who feel it enough to kill. The stuff of nightmares. October 7 was just the spark that lit the fire, where bits and pieces of wood had been collected and stacked for years, for decades, in preparation for this one moment. Slowly, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, but intentionally, in our schools, our universities, in our homes. The evil witnessed on that day is already in our own backyards. Make no mistake about it. It's here. The product of weakness, wokeness, and of course the suicidal empathy that Dr. Gard-Saad explains so well. Not only have, so many in power refused to acknowledge that they've imported an ideology that does not want democracy, peace, and freedom. In fact, the complete opposite. Instead of acknowledging it and trying to correct it, they double down. They attack and silence anyone brave enough to call it out and demand to be protected in their own countries. When a terrorist drives a car into a crowd, he is not checking who is Jewish, who is Christian, who is Muslim. He just wants to kill, destroy, martyr himself. When a jihadist stabs blindly anyone in his path, same deal. We've already seen this happen. Not just in the Middle East, but elsewhere, all over the world. And that was well before they had such an established homegrown cheer squad. So you don't think more of this is coming tenfold? It is. And not far enough away where you can just bury your head in the sand, but much closer to home. And if I'm being completely honest, it's already too late. It is. But the more people who wake up, come together and demand action, the better chance we have. Hamas and what they stand for is the ideal model for those who want to destroy the world. It's perfect. They kill, slaughter, kidnap. They promise to never stop. They don't hide it. They publish it everywhere. Then somehow garner overwhelming support in countries that pretend to stand for the complete opposite. Islamic extremism kills its own people more than anyone else. It is the single greatest enemy of every Muslim who wants to live peacefully. And yes, to those who argue the opposite, they exist in hordes. I grew up in Indonesia, home to the world's largest Islamic population. I love the country. I love the people. I speak the language fluently. Banyak orang di situ keluarga saya. Mereka mau perdamaian. Tidak mau terorisme. The vast majority of them are very decent people who just want to live their lives in peace, pray to their God, love their family. Islamic extremism hurts them more than anyone else, and they know it. But most are too afraid to speak, to fight. And I get it. Many Muslims live in places where being critical will get you killed. So it's up to those of us who can speak, who have a voice, who have a platform, no matter how big, no matter how small, to fight for everyone who faces this threat. And by the way, that is all of us, in case you haven't been paying attention. We're at a crucial point in time. We continue along the same path, Western civilization ceases to exist as we know it, and something far more sinister takes place. Or we say enough is enough and we fight back. It's so simple. It is good versus evil. You don't have to choose to stand for innocent children in Gaza or for those in Israel. For the majority of Muslims or Jews, they have the same enemy. Pick both. I do. Every second I fight is for every child in every place of every religion who deserves to live without death, destruction, and pain, permanent pain. So, no, again, I haven't lost the plot. I just understand what's at stake. And I want my 7-year-old to grow up in a world where she is safe. I want that for your kids too. When they go to concerts, when they're at school, when they're out with their friends, when they're walking along the road at 8 p.m. at night. And that's looking less and less likely the more useful idiots take center stage promoting terror whilst the majority stay silent. So I don't care that I'll never have another normal job in the media again. I don't want one. This matters more. If fighting terrorism and standing up for victims of it makes me controversial, then so be it. I'll wear that badge with pride. All I want to do is try and reach as many people as possible. Show the reality, not the made-up narrative constructed by terrorists and their fan clubs, and then let you decide. Again, help show the world that by standing with Israel, you are standing with children in Gaza. And you don't even have to stand with Israel. I don't know if you've noticed, they don't need you. Just stand against the terrorists. Against terror. For the children in Gaza who will never have peace whilst Hamas exists. Never. The Jewish state, Israel, is of course not perfect. I've said that many, many times. No country is. But they are currently doing the lion's share of fighting an enemy that threatens every single one of us, giving their own lives at the coalface and being demonized for it. So if you don't want to see what happened on October 7, or in Boulder, or in Colorado, or in Paris, or in the UK, or on September 11 continue to happen in your own backyard, then wake up and demand more. Because if you don't, that kind of horror, that kind of hell is coming your way. It's coming our way. And it might be you in that video I watch that repeats over and over in my head almost daily. Running with your child. Trying to escape. The look I saw in a desperate dad's face as he ran trying to save his little boys. It will haunt me forever. They threw a grenade at him, by the way. Blew him to pieces. These are Hamas terrorists. They then raided his fridge with a smile, while his kids who witnessed the whole thing shook violently. So don't let this movement of evil grow and expand because of Western weakness and useful idiots. Save those children in Gaza by condemning their killers, their actual killers, their enemy, Hamas, by supporting the destruction of their chief funders, the Islamic regime in Iran. Listen to what those on the ground are saying, not terrorist propaganda, but the people. Those in Gaza screaming that their enemy is Hamas, that Hamas is to blame. And then they're being killed for it daily. People in Iran are over 80% desperate for the kind of freedom we take for granted. They hate the regime that Western idiots are out trying to fight for. It murders them for showing a strand of hair. How do activists in the West purport to know more than those on the ground dying? So I've had enough with the BS, the insanity, the pretending that terrorists are victims and those they slaughter, the oppressors. I want to save Palestinian babies from the death sentence they are born into. I want to save Israeli children from being burned alive and save all our children in the process. This will take a global effort, a reckoning. And I hope that happens before something unimaginable forces our hands, something too big to ignore, something too close to home.